Screencasters.heathenx.org aims to provide a useful service, helping to grow creativity and knowledge like a flower blooming in a field of rainbows. However, we are not responsible for unintended side effects while using these Inkscape screencasts. If you notice that you feel overly tired, experience ringing of the ears, upset tummy, runny nose, watery eyes, cramping of the right forefinger, dry skin, or numb tongue, please discontinue use of these screencasts temporarily. Please consult your doctor if you experience diarrhea, louder than normal flatulence, restless leg syndrome, hyperactivity, grumpiness, or lack of restful sleep. Known side effects include jumpy knees, sore elbows, burning ears, general incoherence, the unwillingness to dance in public, and an extreme appetite for jelly donuts and sugary cereals.
In this episode, I will use Blender and Inkscape to make a vitamin bottle. I'll be using Blender 2.49b and Inkscape version 047 Pre-4. I do want to be upfront with everyone. I should not be teaching anybody how to model objects in Blender. The reason for this is that I'm still kind of new at modeling. Even though I can make some simple models of everyday objects, I really question whether I know enough to teach someone else. There are many things that I do not fully understand yet know how to use in this application. So please, if you have any experience with Blender, then try not to be too critical of my modeling skills. It's likely that I haven't learned the proper way of doing things. With the exception of some online tutorials, I'm partly self-taught. I discover a lot of things just by tinkering in the application and poking at the settings. There are many aspects to Blender where one can devote a great deal of time. So if you want to conquer this software, then start now, have patience, and be prepared for a learning curve. There is much to digest. In the end, you'll discover just how powerful Blender can be. Also, I want to make our Inkscape viewers out there aware that this particular screencast is pretty heavy on Blender and a little light on Inkscape. I apologize for that. Normally, I wouldn't screencast something like this, but some of our viewers were interested in learning a little more on Blender. The main point of this episode is to again show that Inkscape and Blender can work together. I'll try to break this screencast up into several parts. An Inkscape part and a Blender part, and I may divide the Blender video up into two just to keep the file sizes down. So let's get started with Inkscape first. What I want to do is make a simple label for the plastic bottle, and let's go to an image that I posted on our Flickr screencasters site. What I want to do in Inkscape is I want to draw this label. And what I want to do in Blender is model this 3D vitamin bottle. I'm going to keep the model a little bit simpler. I'm not going to add this text on the cap, and I'm not going to model the caplet. So we're just going to keep things a little simpler. If you guys want to go in and add those things as you learn along or whatever, be my guest. Also, in Richard's last episode, he gave us a link to the League of Movable Type website, and that's a great website. They've got some really nice fonts on there. They're a little light on the amount of fonts that they have, but the ones that they do have are very, very nice. And one of my favorites is this League Gothic font. I'm going to use League Gothic in the Inkscape portion of this screencast, so if you want to play along, you might want to grab that and install it. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to grab my rectangle tool and we'll draw a rectangle. And I'm going to true this up to size. I'm going to make this about 278 wide by 128 high. And we'll go ahead and place that on our page in the middle. And I also want to note, too, that my key status monitor is partly broken still. My keys show up, but my mouse is not working at the moment. So I still haven't had a chance to figure out what I need to do to get that working. So you see that my keys work, but my mouse doesn't. All right. The next thing I'm going to do is let's double click on this and give this a radii of 6.5 all the way around. And we're going to go to File, Document Properties, and having this selected, I'm going to fit my page border to this object. So we do that with Fit Page to Selection. That way I can press 5 on my keypad and kind of zoom in on it just a little bit. Okay, now the next thing that I'm going to do is let's make some text. I'll type in once a day, and we'll go to our text tool, and I'll type L to get me down to the L's, and League Gothic is what I want to do. And I'm going to type in, let's make this, let's try 48. See what that looks like. That looks pretty good. And I'm going to change the color. I'm going to open up my color dialog. And I think what I'm going to do, I know exactly what I want for a color, so I'm going to go ahead and type it in. It's an FFDC86. That gives me kind of a nice creamy yellow. And it goes well with this blue color. So let's go ahead and center that up on our page. Alright, and I'm going to right click on this, duplicate, and we're going to move down, and we'll make this white. Okay, and we'll go to our text tool, we'll go to the text tab, and I'm going to put in here 100 caplets. We'll enter, and I'll put in daily supplement. Okay, now I want that font to be centered, and I want it to be a 100% for line spacing. We'll make this 12 for the font size, and I'll apply that. Okay, and we'll go ahead and center that up on our page. We'll open up our Align and Distribute button. By the way, my Align and Distribute button is off screen, so basically I'm down arrowing and clicking my Align and Distribute button. Richard and I screencast at a certain size, and some of our icons get clipped off, so that's why that button's off the screen. Okay, so I'm going to hold my control key down and move this down just a little bit, and we'll get this about maybe that high. And what I'm going to do next is zoom out. And if you go to your Inkscape installed directory under, I think, Share and then Clip Art, you have a file called Draw Freely SVG. I'm going to bring in that image and use it for my label. Okay, and I do that just by dragging and dropping it onto my canvas. I'm going to ungroup it, and I'm going to get rid of this ghost image here. I'm going to take these two objects and group it. We'll scale that down, and we'll put it over here for now. And for this Draw Freely object, I'm going to true it up. So we'll make it 221 by 57. And we'll throw that on our page. I'll press 5 on my keypad to zoom in on the page. And I'm going to highlight this Draw Freely text. We'll go to our Align and Distribute, center that on my page, and holding the Control key down and left clicking, I'm just going to move it up just a little bit. Get something that looks about like that. Okay? And I'll take this once a day text and drive it down just a little bit. Probably looks pretty good. And I'll take our Inkscape logo, and I'm going to hold the Control key down and left click on this upper arrow to keep it in scale. Okay, and I'm going to take that. I'm going to highlight our text. I'm going to go to the Align and Distribute. We'll do Last Selected, and we'll center it up. And I'm going to push this out just a little bit over here, okay, just so I can get that in line with our the letter Y down here. Okay, I think that probably looks pretty good. Okay, and we'll delete the guide. Okay, Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this blue a radial gradient. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on that, and I'm going to hit Shift R. Well, let's try it again. Shift R. How about Control R? Whoops, I was hitting Control R. Shift R. There we go. Sorry about that. And I'm going to make this inside a lighter shade of blue, and I'm going to make the outside a darker shade. Let's make it even lighter in the middle. Let's go ahead and edit that and make it just a little bit darker. All right, I think that's pretty good. So we'll give that just a little bit of a radial gradient, so it's not so flat. Okay, and that's pretty much the Inkscape portion of this screencast. So we just wanted to make a simple label. Again, you can come in here and do anything you want eventually, but we'll just keep this label simple. Okay, and then when we're done with this, what we want to do is export this as a PNG. So I'm going to hit Export Bitmap. And I want this to be a 300 dpi image, and I'm going to save that out to my desktop. Okay, so we are going to go Home, Heathen X, Desktop. Well, I want to do lowercase letters here. Linux is case sensitive. And let's call this, let's just call it decal. And I'll hit export. Okay, and that gets written out to my desktop. Okay, now you at home, you know, if you don't want to type in your path, you can just hit browse and locate wherever you want to save it. Okay. All right, so that's it for Inkscape. Let's carry on with the Blender part of the screencast. Okay, welcome back to the second part of this episode. This is the Blender modeling part. I do want to apologize for this Blender window being so small. Typically, I like to draw and model in Blender with full screen, and having a widescreen monitor really helps. When you're screencasting and you got to get everything down into a small window, it does make it hard to see some of these things down here. So I hope you can see it. Also, I just want to make another note that I have my key status monitor up here, and the keys are working, but my mouse isn't. So I'll try to tell you what my mouse clicks are as I do this tutorial. Okay? So what I have here is a default session of Blender. I have the cube in the middle, I have a light, and I have a camera. Okay? So what I want to do is press 7 on my keypad to get in top ortho view. And I want to right click on this cube, and I'm going to hit X to delete it, okay, because we don't want the cube. I'm going to go to Add, Mesh, Circle. Instead of 32, we'll do 12 vertices. I'll take the rest of the defaults, and I'll hit OK. Okay. Now I'm going to middle mouse button and roll to zoom in on this, and I'm going to hit Tab to get into edit mode. You can also do that here, object mode and edit mode. Okay, and what I'm going to do is press E to extrude. I'm going to press Z to extrude only in the Y or the Z direction, and I'm going to type in 0.45 to go 0.45 Blender units upward, and then I'm going to press E to extrude, S to scale, and I'm going to go outward 1.05, and I'll press enter. E to extrude, we're going to go in the Z direction. I'm going to type 1.7, hit enter. E to extrude, S to scale inward this time, and I'm just using my mouse to roll inward, and I'm going to type 0.95 and hit enter. E to extrude, Z to go in the Z direction, 0.45 units. And I'm going to hold my shift and middle mouse button down so I can pan around. I'm going to type E to extrude, S to scale. We're going to type 0.65, enter. E to extrude. I'm going to type Z to go in the Z direction, and I'm going to type 0.45. And that pretty much gives us the basic shape of our vitamin bottle that we're going to model. Okay, now I'm going to type A to deselect everything, and I'm going to type B to get in border select mode, and I'm going to hold my left mouse button down and window around all these vertices down here at the bottom. I'm going to type E to extrude, S, I'm going to type 0, and I'm going to hit enter. Then I'll type A to deselect, and what that does is close that bottom. Okay? Now what I want to do is I want to add some edge loops. Eventually I want all of these edges to be filleted or have a radius on it. Except that I don't want the radius to be very big. I want the radius to be kind of sharp. And in order to do that, we have to add edge loops. So I'm going to do that now. Okay? And basically I'll explain how this thing works in the very end here. Okay, so I'm just going to add them now by hitting Control R, and I'm going to hover over this vertex here, or I'm sorry, this segment, and I'm going to left mouse button click. Okay, now that puts me into grab mode, and what I'm going to do is move this loop down close to this edge down here. So I'm going to left click about right there. Okay, I'm going to hit Control R. I'm going to hover over this segment. I'm going to roll my mouse till I get 2 loops, and then I'm going to left click. A to deselect. And what I'm going to do is add 2 edge loops on this surface around here. Control R, hover over this segment. I'm going to roll to get 2 segments here. Okay. I'll deselect. I'm going to hit Alt Shift right click to select this loop. On Windows, that is just Alt right click. In Linux, it is, well, in Linux under GNOME, I think. I'm not sure if that's the same under KDE or any other desktop manager. But anyways, in Linux, it is Alt Shift right click. Okay? That puts me in grab mode, so I can left click on this blue arrow and just push that down where I want it to go. And then I can just let go of the mouse click to get it there. Okay? Now I want to put 2 edge loops here on this flat surface, so I'm going to zoom in, Control R, hover over this segment, roll, and then left click. And that puts 2 segments there. Or 2 edge loops, I'm sorry. Control R, we're going to hover over this area. I'm going to roll to put 2 edge loops, hit enter, or left click, I'm sorry. A to deselect. Now I'm going to Alt Shift right click to select this whole loop, and I'm going to move this up. Move it up about right there. I'm going to hit Alt Shift right click. Well, first I have to deselect with A. Alt Shift right click to grab this loop. We'll move this down. Okay, and then I need to add edge loops on this flat surface here. So I'm going to press A to deselect. I'm going to hit Control R, hover over this segment, roll my mouse. See, when you roll your mouse, you can add any amount of edge loops that you need. But I only need 2 here, so I'm going to roll until I get 2. Control R, hover over this surface or this segment, and I'm going to roll twice. A to deselect, Alt Shift right click to select that edge loop, and I'm going to push that in closer. And finally, we're going to add 1 to the bottom here, so I'm going to do Control R, hover over this segment, and we're going to scale this outward a little bit till I get it about right there. Okay? Now, That was a little tedious, excuse me, but I know exactly where I need to put them in order to get nice round edges. Okay, so what we're going to do now is add a modifier, and let me just close this so we can see what we're doing. We do that by clicking on this editing button, and under the modifier tools we're going to add a subsurf modifier. So when I add that, that rounds the model. And for levels down here, I'm going to add 2 levels. Okay? Now if I hit tab and get out of this, you see that we have our nice fillets here. But it's still a little rough. What I need to do is add a set smooth to that. So I'm going to go back out to this editing button, and you find a set smooth button down here. Now when I click on that, you see that the whole model becomes very smooth. But on this side here, we have a little bit of a problem, and that's because my normals are not set to all go on the outside of the model. Okay, some are pointing in, some are pointing outside. That's very disgusting. So what we want to do to correct that is hit Tab, hit A to select everything on our model, and then we hit Control N to recalculate normals outside. Okay? I'll hit Tab to get back out into object mode, and now we have a nice clean model. Okay? And we have a model with our fillets right where we want them. Okay? Nice and sharp. And that's why we added those edge loops. Now if you want that radius around here to be bigger or smaller, you get into tab mode, you press A to deselect, and you need to rotate a little bit, and you take this, you do a Alt-Shift right click, and you push this down, and you can see the fillet or the radius getting smaller and bigger. And that's just by adding another loop in there. Okay? And the same thing up here. We do an actually A to deselect, Alt-Shift right click, and I can press S to scale, and we can pull that radius in. Okay, that's how easy edge loops work, and edge loops are very powerful, and if you're going to do any amount of modeling in Blender, best get to know them. Okay, so we're done with the body. Alright, so we're going to give this body a material, so we'll do an add new, we'll click this gray button, and we'll click on white down here. Okay, and it doesn't really change much, but it is white when we render it. Alright, so let's go back into our top view. Whoops, I'm going to press 7 on my keypad, and we are going to go to Add Mesh Circle, and I'm going to take the defaults, which is 12, my setting from last time, and I'm going to roll out just a little bit, and I'm going to move this up. Okay, and this is going to be our cap. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is hit Tab to get into edit mode. I'm going to press E to extrude, Z to go in the Z direction, and we'll make this about this big. I'm just kind of eyeing that. I can change it later. I'm going to press A to deselect everything. I am going to press B to border select, and I'm going to window around all these top vertices here. I'm going to press E to extrude, S to scale, and I'm going to press 0, enter to close it. A to deselect. Okay, and that closes my cap. And basically what we have is a thin wall. Actually, we don't even have a wall. It's just it's a shelled object. Okay, so what I want to do is add just a little bit of a edge down here so it's not wide open, and I do that by pressing B. We're going to border select, E to extrude, S to pull it inward, and I'm just going to eye this a little bit. We'll do it about that much. I'm not going to get too detailed on this cap because you're not going to see the inside anyways, but I just want to add a flat surface right there. Okay, so I'm going to press A to deselect, and I want radii on these edges as well. So I'm going to hit Control R to add edge loops. I'm going to hover over this segment, and I'm just going to scale outward about right there. Control R, hover over this segment. I'm going to add 2 here. A to deselect, Alt Shift right click on this loop here, and I'm going to left click on this blue arrow to pull that up. A to deselect, Alt Shift right click, and we're going to move this down. And I need to add an edge loop on the bottom here. So what I'm going to do is hit Control R, hover over this surface, roll that 2 times until I get that. Okay? A to deselect. Alright, and that's our cap. So let's go ahead and smooth that out a little bit, and we do that by going to our editing button. We find our add modifier. We're going to add a subsurf. We're going to change the levels to 2. By the way, I never go beyond 2 for my levels. You can really click these rendering levels up, and when you do that, it really slows Blender down. So 1 or 2 for levels should be enough for most things. Excuse me. Alright, now what I'm going to do is hit Tab to get back into out into object mode, and we can see that it's still rough. I need to click this Set Smooth button down here to really get that to smoothen out. And we need to calculate those normals. So what I'm going to do is hit Tab, press A to select everything, Control N to recalculate the normals, and then Tab to get back out, and I have a nice looking cap. Okay? So let's right click on this, or having this selected. Let's give this a material, and I'm going to give this a material with a color of red just so I can see it. So when it's on top of this object down here, we can see the difference. Okay? We'll just make that red for now. And I am going to go to 7, my top view, and I'm going to go to add. Basically what I want to do is I just want to add some ribs or some grippers around this cap. Okay, and to do that I got to be in top view. I'm going to go to add, mesh, circle. I'll take the defaults. Okay, I'm going to roll my mouse button out a little bit, and my circle is down here, so I'm going to move it up, and I'm going to hit S to scale it down. Okay, I'm going to press 7 on my number pad, and we'll pull that out about right in here. And I'm going to scale that down even further, okay, because the grippers are kind of small. And I'm going to push that down about right in here, okay. Let's see how big that is. That probably looks pretty good. Now, I'm going to press 3 on my number pad to get me in the right ortho view. You see that my object is right here. Well, I want to push that down until I get it down here somewhere. Okay, so it starts about right in here. Okay, there we see it. Now what I'm going to do is press Tab to get into edit mode. I'm going to press E to extrude, and I'm going to extrude that in the Z direction, and we'll go up about maybe this high. I'm going to press 3 to take a look at that, make sure I'm okay, and I think I am, maybe a little bit higher. Do that just by grabbing that control button there, or that coordinate arrow. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is close it. Okay, so I'm going to press E to extrude, S, and I'm going to push my mouse inward, type 0 on my keypad, and then hit enter. I'm going to do the same to the bottom. A to deselect everything, B to border select, E to extrude, S to extrude inward, 0, and then enter. And then we press A to deselect everything. Blender is very hotkey-ish. I don't use a lot of the menu options in Blender. It's just slower to do it. So that's why I use a lot of hotkeys. Okay. So Now basically what we have is a cylinder. So we want to make that cylinder a little nicer. So what we're going to do is we are going to go to our editing button, add modifier, and we're going to add a subsurf. We're going to set the levels to 2, and we are going to get into object mode, and I'm going to hit set smooth. Again, we have to calculate those normals to get rid of those black lines. So I'm going to hit tab A to select everything, control N to recalculate the normals. Okay, now when I hit tab, you can see that I have a very nice gripper there. Okay, and you can make that any length you want. So if you think that's a little too low, what you can do is go back into tab mode, A, and then B, and you can pull that up, you know, however long you need it. Okay? I'm going to make that just a little bit bigger, so I'm going to get back into tab mode, and we're going to pull this up about right there. Get back out in tab mode. Okay, so there is our gripper. Now what I want to do, I have one single gripper, but I need to array or pattern that gripper all the way around this cap. And you do that with the spin duplicate feature, okay? But you got to be in top view to do it. So I'm going to get into my top view, and having this selected, what I'm going to do is find my my spin button, and I have to do that in edit mode. You cannot be in object mode, okay? So I'm going to either hit tab or just click into object mode. And when you get into object mode, you get your mesh tools button or grouping, and you'll find this spin duplicate down here. Now we want to tell it, how do you want to just go 90 degrees or do you want to go all the way around? We want it to go 360 degrees, and I want to put about 60 of them around here. I'll hit 60 and hit enter, and I'll just hit spin, and you can see that it only added the tops. Why? Because I made a mistake. Okay, so I'm going to hit Control Z, and I got to make sure that I hit A to select everything. Okay, I only had the top selected. Okay, so I'm going to get back into top ortho view by pressing 7, and now again I'm going to hit spin duplicate. Okay, and now we should have the grippers. Okay, so be careful. You do want to select everything when you're duplicating that around. Okay, so I'm going to hit tab to get back out, and we can see that we have our nice grippers. I do want to note though that the grippers are separate models. Okay, that means I can move this cap away from the grippers. In Blender we have a grouping or a parenting feature, but I know I'm not going to make any more changes to these things, so what I'm going to do is use a different feature called join. I'm going to press B to border select, and I'm going to window around both these objects, and I'm going to hit Control J to join everything, and that joins the meshes into one shape. Okay, or one object I mean. Alright, so there's our cap. I'm going to press 3, and we can move this cap down a little bit. Now if you think that cap is a little bit too small, what you can do is get into, I'll press 3, get into tab edit mode, A to select everything, or deselect, I'm sorry, B to border select, and I'm going to go about halfway through the cap. I'll window above, and I'll just pull that cap up just a little bit more. Okay? Now, what I want to do is I also want to taper that cap in just a little bit. And having that already selected, I'm going to press S, and you can see that I can taper the model. Okay? If I want the cap to come outward, I just drag my mouse. If I want it to come inward just a little bit, I just drag my mouse inward. Okay? And I'm going to come in just a little bit, and I'm going to left click, I'm going to press tab to get out, and now I have a final bottle. Okay? Now that we're done with it, let's go ahead and change our color back to white. There we go. And it does look gray on our screen, but it is actually white when we render it out. Okay? So let's go ahead and stop the screencast at this part. We'll pick up with part 3 in just a few minutes. Okay, welcome back to part 3 of the screencast. Let's go ahead. I think we've modeled the bottle. Let's go ahead and add our Inkscape decal to this. What we want to do first is let's go ahead and do a rendering first just to see how this thing looks in its default view. Now you remember that we have a light and a camera over here. If we were to hit F12 or just come back here to our scene and hit render, we will get a rendering. It's rendering off screen because I don't want it. When I render as I'm screencasting, it does kind of screw up the graphics, so I'd like to render off screen. You get something that looks like this. Okay, that's kind of undesirable. That's not what we want to do. So what I want to show you is I want to place the camera in its correct location, and I want to give this also 3-point lighting. Okay, and I'm going to set that up before I do the decal. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that now. So what I'm going to do is I am going to first place my camera in the right location, and I do that by right-clicking on my camera, and I have written these settings down ahead of time. So what I'm going to do is open up my transform properties. You can do that by going to View, Transform here, and that tells me the location, the rotation, and the scale of my camera. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and change the location X. I'm going to type 0, hit enter. I'll left click into this box. We'll do a -6, enter. For Z, we will do a 4, enter. And for rotation on X, I'm going to type in here 69, enter. And I'm going to go 0 here. And for Z, we'll go 0 here. Okay. Now, if I were to press 0 on my keypad, you see that that kind of changes the camera and puts me in a view like this. Okay? And that's what I have on my my Flickr image. All right, so let's roll back out. Now what I want to do, I'm going to press 5 to get into ortho view here, or orthographic view. Now what I want to do is I'm going to right click on this light, and I'm going to go to my shading options, and I'm going to change that lamp to a spotlight. I'm going to change its distance from a 30 to a 20, and I'm going to change its energy from a 1 to a 1.25. Okay, I really like spotlighting, but in this case here, I'm going to have to add 2 more spotlights to get the proper shading. Okay, but first, what we're going to do is we're going to put this in the right location. So let's go ahead and change our values here. I'm going to do a -8. For Y, we'll do a -13. For Z, we will do a 10. Over here, rotation X, I'm going to put in 62. Rotation Y, we'll do 0. And rotation Z, I'm going to do a -33. Okay, and that's going to swing that camera around so it's pointing in a downward direction on the left. Okay. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to press 7 to get into top view, and having that light highlighted, I'm going to do a Shift D. Okay, and I'll just move my mouse over here somewhere, and that will duplicate that light, and that works the same way, kind of in Inkscape. All right. So having that selected, I want to change my right light to an 8, negative 13. For Z, we'll do a 10. We'll do a 62 for X, a 0 for Y, and basically all I'm going to do here is change this from negative 33 to 33, and that duplicates the light but just shines it to the right now, okay, or shines it in the left direction, I guess. Okay, so I have two lights here that are shining down on my object. Okay, I'm going to press 7. I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate that light, and we're going to add a third light that's pointing downward. So I'll change its values. For location, we'll do 0. For Y, we'll do 0. Actually, for Y, I'm going to do a, let's back up here. We're going to do a negative 3. Sorry about that. And for Z, we'll do a 34. And I'll make sure all the rest of these units are 0. Okay. And what that does is points a light downward on my object. So you can see that spotlight pointing downward, but I want to change its energy to just a 1.0. Okay? There we go. And when you left click in Blender, it moves your 3D cursor around. I always like to have my 3D cursor back on 0. So what you can do is go to View, open up View Properties, and we'll click on View, and under our 3D cursor, I'm going to press 0, enter, 0, enter, and 0, enter to get that back on 0. Okay? I'll go ahead and close that. Okay, so that's my lighting and my camera. Okay, so now when I render this, and it's rendering off screen, okay, it's done. I'm going to go ahead and drag this in. Now you can see our bottle starting to take shape. Okay, we have nice lighting on this thing. I've got a light from the left and right and a light from the top. Okay, starting to look good. All right, so let's go ahead and add our decal. When we do that, I'm just going to roll up on this object. And I am going to go to my front view. We'll type 1. And I am going to add an empty. Okay, so we have the bottle highlighted. We type 1 to go to front view. And I'm going to go to Add, Empty. Okay, and that places a point or an empty down here, and I'm going to take that empty and move it out this way so we can see it. Okay, now notice that my empty, my Z is going up, Y going away, and X going in this direction. What I'm going to do is flip that empty so my Z is going in this direction. Okay, so I'm going to go rotate on the X axis, and I'm going to type 90 and hit enter. Okay, so that rotates my empty. Okay, now you want to take note that when we right click on this empty and have it highlighted, we see a name down here called empty. That's the default name. Okay, so you can change that name to decal or label or just leave it empty. We're going to name it decal. Hit enter. And what I'm going to do now is apply a texture to this body. So I'm going to right click on this body here, the vitamin bottle. We're going to go to our shading options. What I'm going to do now is click on my texture button. I'm going to hit add new. Where it says none here, we're going to select image. We're going to load our image. Okay. Now we're going to load. Now you remember in the first part we saved out a 300 dpi image called decal PNG. Okay, so I'm going to highlight that by left clicking, and you can't see my button right there because I have my key status monitor in the way. But we select this decal and then we hit select image. Okay, and what that does, let me move this back up here. And what that does is it loads my image in as a texture. And we can see it in the preview here. Okay. By default, when we render this, and I'll go ahead and do that now, just to show you where we're at with this. Okay, it's done. Now by default, it takes that entire texture and wraps it around my body, and that's because we've told it to repeat it. We haven't told it what to do yet. Okay, so what we're going to do is we want to remove it from repeat and put it on clip. Okay, and next thing that we want to do is go to the material button, the red button, and we can see that our image is just clipped onto our surface. But what we need to do is we need to map that onto our empty. Okay, so we're going to go to map input, and we're going to go object, and for the object here we're going to type in decal, because that was the name of our empty right here, and it is case sensitive, so make sure that you get the right case, and I'm going to hit enter. Okay, now when we scoot over here, we start to see that our decal is located properly. Okay, so let's go ahead and render this, and we'll see what this thing looks like. Okay, there we have it. Our decal is now on our bottle as a decal. But there is a problem. We haven't moved our empty up high enough so the decal can wrap around the image. Wherever the empty is located on our in our 3D environment here is basically where the label will draw from, or will get mapped to. Okay, so we want to change that. So what I'm going to do is highlight this empty, and I know the coordinates, so what I'm going to do is change the x to 0. We'll change the y to a negative 1.75. We'll change the z to a 1.3. That moves this empty upward, and will also move our decal upward on the bottle. For the scale, I'll leave x1. I'll leave, actually, let's change the y to a 0.62. That's going to scale our empty in the y direction, thus skewing the image. Okay, so if you were to type SX and scale this in the x direction, you can skew your image on the x-axis, or if you were to scale on the y-axis, you can skew your image in the y direction. Okay, for rotation, we'll do 90. Okay, everything is fine. So you can see that we've moved and scaled that empty up just a little bit. Okay, so now when we rendering this off screen, okay, I'll go ahead and pull this image in. Now we can see the rendering, or the decal, is mapped exactly where we want it. And we know this because ahead of time I've deconstructed my model, and I thought it would just be easier and quicker if I told everyone what the coordinates were rather than try to figure out those coordinates by hand. Okay, now typically when I'm modeling stuff in Blender, I never fool around with these coordinates. I'm always moving objects in my 3D window here until I find something I like. But in order to move this screencast along, it's just easier to give everyone the coordinates, and you can just type them in to get exactly what you want. Okay? So, where did we leave off? Okay, we have a nice rendering. But what we don't have on our rendering is we don't have a floor surface and a background or a wall. We're basically rendering out to what's called the world view, or the world rendering, or whatever it's called. So what we're going to do now is we are going to add a cube. So we're going to go to add. Actually, I like to add things. I always like to add things in the top view. It's not necessary, but I'm going to press 7. We're going to go to a mesh cube. Okay, and that puts a cube into our view. And I'm going to scale that cube upward really big. Okay, and I'm going to press Tab to edit it. I'm going to press A to deselect everything. And I'm going to highlight this button right here, our face select mode. And when we do that, we get these little dots on our faces. But we can see through the box, and I don't want that behavior, so I'm going to select this button here. Okay, and that makes the box solid. And I'm going to right click on that face. I'm going to hit X and delete faces. I'm going to right click on this face, X, delete faces. Right click on this face, X, delete faces, and right click on this top face, X, and delete that face. Okay, and basically what I have is an angle shape. Alright, so I'm going to get back into object mode. Now I want to scale this object, so I'm going to hit S for scale, and I'm going to scale it along the X axis only. Okay, and I'll just drag that outward about this far. Can't go too big actually. Now what I'm going to do is press S and Y to scale this in the Y direction. I know this is a little hard to see with my grid, but basically I've made this really big. Okay. Now I want to move it up, so I'm going to press 3, and I'm going to get into my right view here, and I'm going to scroll up. And this is going to be a ground surface, so I want this close to my bottle, or my model. So I'm going to press G, Z, and I'm just going to move this up until I get it very close. Okay, there we go. Alright, and that gets me pretty close, and that's going to be my rendering surface. Okay, now I know this is all very busy in here and you got a lot of stuff going on, but I'm going to go ahead and hit render this off screen, and I'll show you what's going on. What I need is a ground surface so I can see my shading. Okay, go ahead and pull that in. Okay, now this thing is starting to take shape. Basically, I have a shade here, a shadow here, a shadow here, and you can see that I have kind of like a wall surface in the back here. That's exactly what I like to have in a rendering. So you can kind of see that this pill bottle or vitamin bottle is sitting on a surface and it's got some reflection. Okay, so we're going to add some reflection now. So I'm going to right click, having this surface right clicked, I am going to give this a new material. I'm going to press this gray and we'll give it this tango-ish black color. Okay, that'll darken it up. And I'm going to go to our mirror button or mirror tab here, and I'm going to press Ray Mirror and Ray Transparency, and I'm going to move these sliders just a little bit. We don't want to overdo these settings, okay? And what that's going to do is it's going to make this floor and wall surface shiny so we can see reflections, okay? Now what I want to do is I want to make this wall rounded right here, okay? So in order to do that, I'm going to press Tab. I'm going to press Control R to add an edge loop. We'll add one right here, and I'm going to move this down. Okay, Control R again, and we're going to add an edge loop right here. Okay, now when we add a subsurf modifier, this will get rounded and blended. Okay, let's go ahead and I'm going to hit Alt Shift right click. Whoops. Press A. Alt Shift right click on that. Well, that's fine. We'll just leave it. I was going to move that in, but let's just go ahead and add our subsurf modifier to that. So we go to our editing button, add modifier, subsurf. We will give this a level of 2, and I'll get back out into object mode and I'll hit set smooth here. Okay. Now we see just a nice little radius back there. So when we hit our rendering button, render this thing out here. And rendering does take a while. Okay, so let's take a look at this. Okay, now we start to see the thing come together. So just like in my Flickr image, basically we've seen a reflection here. We see highlights back here. That's the radius that we see. And this thing is starting to come together. And I think we're pretty much done here. What you can do, I have my settings ramped really far down here in my rendering because I want to render quickly. If you want to get a little nicer rendering, I'll hit 75 here, but I'm going to leave 5 for the smoothing. And I am going to go ahead and render that, and we'll render this just a little bit bigger here. Anytime that you're modeling objects in Blender and you want to see nice renderings as you're modeling, it always makes good sense to uncheck your oversampling or your anti-aliasing. And to drive your settings down all the way. Sometimes you can either go 50% or 25%. So when you're rendering something, your renderings will go quickly. Now they won't look great, but at least you can kind of get a sense of what something is going to look like. There are another couple tips too. When you're rendering too, you can have this border selected down here. And basically what you can do is draw a little window around just the thing that you want to render. Also, there is, I think it's Shift P or Control P, which will give you a little rendering window. Wherever you push that window in your environment, it'll only render that portion. So it'll kind of give you a quick preview of what the thing is supposed to look like. Okay, so those are little tips that you learn as you're modeling things in Blender. Okay, this thing is just about done rendering off screen. And couple more passes and it's rounding the horn. Now again, this image still isn't quite perfect, but it's close, and it'll give you a close enough. That is basically our vitamin bottle model. Okay, we've added a decal. I've showed you how to model something very simple. Again, the image is a little rough because I have my settings down here pretty rough. When you're all said and done and you're ready to roll on the final rendering, I would bump that all the way up to 16. Change your size here to maybe, I don't know, 1024 by 768. And when you click render, when it's all done, you can go to File. Let's push this off screen. You can go to File, Save Rendered Image, and you can write out this final image. Okay? And that's it. So let's go ahead and move this off to the right, and we'll take a look at our Flickr image. And you can see that what we have is very close to what I posted on Flickr. Now I made the label a different color. You guys can do anything you want for a label. And that's pretty much our tutorial. Okay? Now, I just want to give props to the people who taught me the most in Blender regarding modeling. One is Kernan Dillon. He has a screencasting site on Blender called Blender Newbies. I highly recommend you guys check that out if you want more Blender screencasts. Unfortunately, you're not going to see a lot of them from me. Richard and I have kind of a site devoted to Inkscape, not Blender, so and I'm not really interested in making a lot of Blender screencasts. So you can get them from Blender Newbies. Also, I want to thank Jonathan Williamson. His site He's one of the co-founders of BlenderCookie.com. Jonathan is an excellent artist, and I do like to watch his screencasts. He's taught me quite a bit too, so I just want to give props to those guys. So that's pretty much our screencast. So thank you for watching. I'm Heathen X.